Legislators start taking tough pension votes, and state workers have a new contract. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Legislators before the Easter break have been busy, and here to talk about it, a couple of Springfield know-it-alls. Kent Redfield is back, Professor Emeritus Political Science at University of Illinois Springfield. Welcome back, Kent.
Good to be here.
And Jim Leach is here, who covers everything, so legislation and stuff is part of it. He is News and Program Director, WMAY-AM in Springfield.
Thank you, Bernie.
Welcome back. Let's talk first about pensions, and perhaps we should ask the professor because he's one of those state guys, but we have had some votes. There was a bill in the Senate fashioned by Senator Biss, Representative Neckrich, Representative Cross, that was somewhat comprehensive that failed, and then a smaller bill that Senator Cullerton, a pared-down version of Senator Cullerton's bill, which I guess only will apply to current teachers in the teachers' retirement system, passed the Senate. But then the House passed something bigger in the last few days that would limit cost of living increases and affect pretty much everybody with state pensions except judges. So where are we at this point? And apparently my colleague Doug Finke told me, was at a press conference with Tom Cross, the leader of the House, said, well, people are starting to look at the budget and see that this is really serious. They're taking tougher votes. How serious will they be?
Well, there's no question they're tougher votes, because anytime you're voting to reduce the COLAs for both current employees and retirees, you've got a lot of people's attention, and those are tough votes for people that have state facilities in their districts, and there are an awful lot of retired teachers out there spread throughout the state. But you really have a conflict between the House and the Senate. The Senate has turned down a comprehensive bill with a COLA reduction and passed a version of Senate President Cullerton's proposal, which is to essentially get people to trade their COLA for access to health care. So that passed with
in other words, the free health care.
30 votes, and now the House with got 65 votes on a bill to that would cut COLAs. So you've got a huge conflict between the Speaker of the House and the Senate President about how we ought to go about doing this, and it will probably make for an interesting and long spring.
And the very real concern, too, about the constitutionality of everything that's being discussed, because you do have that pesky clause in the Illinois Constitution that says you cannot diminish those pension benefits. A lot of belief there that reducing those COLAs that have been promised amounts to a diminishment of the benefits, and that anything you pass along those lines will just be struck down by the courts anyway, and then you're back to square one again.
Which is why Senator Cullerton says employees should be given a choice between the free health care. Well, it's free for people who I guess had 20 years.
Well, versus
the cost of living increase.
Yeah, two different things there, because it's access to health care. If you in fact would keep your COLA, then you would give up your access to health care as a retiree or an employee. I mean, going forward, and whereas the other part of this is the state paying the premiums for retirees. So it is, it's a major conflict in terms of how they want to go about this. The politics are also interesting. All 118 members of the House are up. The Democrats have a substantial majority, but you always assume the Speaker is mindful of how legislation might affect his majority. In the Senate, because of the way they sequence these terms, there are only 19 members of the Senate that are up. 7 Republicans, 12 Democrats. Of those 12 Democrats, there are 2 of them that got less than 60% in the 2012 election. So it doesn't have the political immediacy that it does for the people in the House.
Yeah, people might wonder, didn't we just have an election? But of course, the 2014 cycle is already here. People are making their intentions known. We're here, and we'll talk more about that later in the show. statewide. But by the end of 2013, people will have filed. By the state fair this summer, candidates will be speaking as candidates for governor and all the other races on the statewide ballot in 2014. So it never ends in Illinois. Related to the employee benefit situation, pensions also, is the fact that the legislature had passed legislation that said that retirees can be charged for insurance. And that had been challenged in court, but now Steve Narduli, a circuit court judge in Sangamon County, has, as if I'm getting it exactly right, dismissed various cases about this and said that it is legal for the state to charge for that insurance coverage. It's not one of those protected benefits that the Constitution says you can't diminish retirement benefits or pension benefits. So we understand that that's probably going to be appealed to a higher court, but just effective that, or obviously people in Springfield care more than some other places because there's so many state employees and retired state employees in the center of the state.
Well, it certainly, it opens up, I guess, possibilities for the legislature when they're trying to figure out how to start nibbling away at this mountain of unfunded liability if the actual pension benefits are seen as untouchable because it would violate the Constitution. Healthcare benefits are now touchable. Now that's something they can focus on. So if you're a retiree, you've got to be a little bit nervous, I would think, at this point. You've got the court ruling. You've also got the new Ask Me contract that essentially codifies that payment premium for retirees who had been enjoying free premiums, no-cost premiums for their healthcare. So they're getting it from all sides now. So you know that if you're a retiree, you're going to be paying more and maybe a lot more in the future.
Yeah, to be clear, we had a statute was passed that said, you for every 5 years you're a state employee, or every year you're an employee, you get a certain percentage of your healthcare premiums paid. After 20, then you don't pay any premiums. That would be my current situation. I had 33 years in with the state. I'm not paying anything for my premium. Now the legislature.
And you look so young.
Legislature changed the law, said CMS can essentially charge the cost. And that's what the court case was about, is whether or not that kind of promise that was in the law meant anything or not. And it may very well not. And what that means is that you're going to be paying, under the Ask Me contract, 1% of your monthly annuity for health care the first year and 2% the second if you're in Medicare, or 2% and 4% if you're not in Medicare. So this will save the state a significant amount of money on retiree health care, although clearly if you went to a much higher percentage, which you certainly could, then you're starting to talk $800 million, or there's a lot of money out there, and so that's certainly significant.
You mentioned under the new contract, of course, AFSCME, American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, which represents 30 or 40,000 state, 35,000 state employees. Contract, after 15 months of negotiation, finally was agreed to and then was ratified. We just heard in the last week by, I guess, 95% of union members, and there are some retroactive pay raises in there. So I guess the question is, will the state come up with the money to pay that? But obviously the Quinn administration thinks it will. I've seen some conservative commentary, he gave away too much, but we also, have a lot of state workers, and they've been working without a contract for a while.
Well, I talked to Steve Brown this week, Mike Madigan's spokesman, and asked him that question. And he said it's not really an issue of will the legislature appropriate the money. He says they appropriate lots and lots of money for personal service line items. It's then a question of, does the governor want to use that to pay off that? And it's about $140 million in the back pay raises that were promised but never delivered. And do you want to then use that and cut in other areas and maybe have layoffs and other things? So that's one possibility, is you pay the back pay raises, but then you have to lay off people because there's only X number of dollars to go around into the pool. And what Steve Brown is saying is essentially, don't blame the legislature. If the governor makes these promises and makes that commitment to the contract, that's up to him. We're only going to allocate so many dollars because we're operating on certain revenue assumptions, and we're not going to go any farther than that. So we'll allocate X number of dollars. If the governor wants to use that for raises, that's fine. He'll just have to cut in other areas. And
it's not unusual for the legislature, particularly when they're fighting with the governor, to take that kind of approach, that this is just dollars. We're not cutting jobs or anything. I remember just to go in the deep past, Howie Carroll, a Democrat from Chicago, you know, when he came out of committee hearing and you took $300,000 out of corrections budget, how many guards did you fire? And his response was, we're just talking money. It's up to the governor, up to the agency director. So there is a question about whether, because there's a lot of budget pressure. The state budget is governor's proposed budget is $500 million more than what the revenue figure the House adopted.
Right.
It assumes, I think, some money that's going to come in from cutting business taxes that I wouldn't bet the farm on. And it says we're going to cut education $400 million. And so if you don't cut education and you don't have $500 million more in revenue, then
somewhere.
you're close to $1 billion that you have to take out of the governor's budget somewhere else. So this is going to be an ugly budget fight on top of an ugly pension fight on top of everything else.
Yeah, when you talk about revenue, I'll throw out a topic that I haven't heard a lot lately, but gambling. You know, there's talk about the governor, we know, vetoed the gambling bill from last year that would have created like 5 new casinos, and apparently there are negotiations going on to reemerge another bill that would, you know, allow Chicago to have a casino and perhaps 4 other locations in the state. But again, if you get that up and running, it still could take a while for that revenue to start rolling in.
It seems like the governor really opened the door again to this in the budget address, I believe it was, where he brought it up again, but said, if you'll give me the safeguards that I'm wanting so that we don't have, what did he refer to it as, a loophole for mobsters or something like that. The governor's apparently very concerned that Tony Soprano and his friends are going to be taking over.
It was the highlight of his budget address.
It really was. And so he opened that door again to say, okay, fine, I will consider this as long as you make a nod to the ethics considerations. And so they've been talking about that, about putting some limits on contributions from the gaming industry back to lawmakers
or banning them, right.
and other things that would make the governor's mind at ease on it. So it certainly seems to me like they are on a track to get this done. And then, as you said, it will take a little while for the revenue to roll in, but there's probably a lot of money to be made out there with that.
Yeah, we're starting to see the money coming in from the video poker, the slot machines in your favorite restaurant or gas station. Or
I was at
whatever.
one place where I saw them once, and it didn't seem to be ruining society right there, but it is kind of an amazing change from, it's only been like 35 years or, when Governor Walker, I think, was the first one to allow scratch-off lottery tickets, and people worried about the effects of gambling on society, and now it's going to be almost everywhere.
One of the problems with gambling bills is they tend to be things that you put a lot of stuff in to collect votes and to make different parts of the state.
Christmas tree effect.
Yeah, and so they pared the bill down and in response to the governor, but that it looks like part of the hang-up is they may have taken too much out of it, and so there is, there's still a lot of negotiation going on to make sure that all parts of the state are happy, all the different horse racing and boats are happy. They're complex deals. So.
And the gaming industry itself. I mean, there's a pushback. There's a coalition for responsible gaming that's running a big ad campaign around the state now.
Yeah, don't throw another, million or $1 billion at an industry.
And warning, you're trying to turn racetracks into casinos, and wouldn't that be a terrible thing? And let's not rush into this. And it sounds to me, at least, I haven't looked that closely into this coalition, but it sounds to me like it's some of the folks who already have a pretty good chunk of the pie and don't want to see it divided up.
We know the riverboats have all, the ones that are established have all been opposed to new ones coming in because it takes away business. And
and there's a saturation point there somewhere, but we have a huge chunk of our budget, and it's probably going to be more that is dependent on revenue from gambling or gaming.
Right.
I mean,
well,
have to be correct
of course,
with the
part of the argument or part of the business in Chicago, especially, goes over to Indiana.
Right.
And so bringing that back to an Illinois location would be better for the state. It wouldn't just be taking money away from somebody else within the state. On the other hand, there is still that argument about the morality of gambling, but perhaps that's so quaint these days.
Yeah, there are social costs from gambling, no question about it. But it pretty much at this point revenue trumps everything else, and I suspect we'll get a bill.
Although it's interesting to note, too, at the same time this is going on, we also have the state saying that the private company we've hired to run the lottery owes the state $20 million because they missed their revenue projections by about almost $100 million.
Yeah.
They thought they'd sell so many more tickets than what they actually sold. So you talk about the saturation point. You wonder if maybe we're starting to get to that point where.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I think, are they called North Star? I think
North
so.
Star Lottery, right?
Which was a conglomeration of various entities that did this and got the state contract. Which is funny because it sounded really bad, I think, to try to privatize our lottery when Governor Blagojevich was here, because everybody was worried about what he was getting out of the deal. Well, he's nowhere right now that he can get anything out of the deal. It is operating under Governor Quinn, who clearly doesn't seem to be of that money situation mode on a personal level. We think he's on the square and trying to do the right thing. Not that everybody would agree with his motivation, but certainly he hasn't been accused of these ethics questions. And it is interesting that now it is that private company, and as you say, Jim, that they are fighting. By the way, they think it was calculated wrong, and I don't think they want to pay all the $20 million because they haven't met targets. They haven't gotten enough people to buy the tickets out of those $5 a pop on a machine in a gas station. It's very weird.
And the governor's response was, this shouldn't be that hard to fix. Just get more people to buy tickets, and that should clear up the problem.
Well, there you go. I'm going to shift gears just slightly. A little bit of a national thing within the last week. The state or the National Republican Party, Reince Priebus, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, came out with this 98-page document how they can make the Republican Party more successful in elections, reach out to more constituencies. And of course, Pat Brady, the state of Illinois GOP chairman, who has his own problems with elements of his party, said they're working on a similar document for Illinois, which they expect to come out, I think, within several weeks. It's in the works to see what they can do to have better election results. I just wonder, thoughts on, Illinois has become pretty much of a blue state. Is that where we think Illinois is? And will something like what the Republican Party is doing change it from Democratic governors since Blagojevich and Quinn to perhaps going back to a Republican?
We've had this ongoing battle for the heart and soul of the Illinois GOP between the moderates and the far right conservatives, who do great in primaries and then not so well in general elections. And there's been a big concern that if they continue to go that way in primaries, they will continue to lose to the likes of Pat Quinn in general elections, which is very frustrating for Republicans. We've got a long history of electing moderate Republicans in the state, of the Jim Thompson and Jim Edgar ilk and Judy Bart Topinka. And so there's folks in the GOP who want to steer the party back in that direction. But right now it seems like the majority of the party is leaning the other direction, farther to the right. So they're having the battle now over Pat Brady's future as chairman. Admittedly, he didn't have a great track record in the last election, but the bigger problem was he came out saying he was acting on his own in support of same-sex marriage and encouraging Republican senators to vote for same-sex marriage. That really irritated the social conservative wing of the Illinois Republican Party, and that's what it seems like it really sparked this effort to try to unseat him. The weighted vote among the committeemen was almost 60% to oust Pat Brady. You have to get to 60%, and they wound up being one vote short because some of the more moderate Republicans like Mark Kirk started making calls and saying, let's not do this. Let's not have this reputation that we are trying to purge moderates from the party. That won't sit well with suburban soccer moms and some of the folks that we've got to have to win the next round of elections.
Well, that was interesting too. I mean, one of the senators that pushed this early on, and people know his name because he ran statewide for a few things, or a couple things, governor and U.S. senator. Jim Oberweis is now a senator from just outside Aurora, and he, I think it was clearly thought at the beginning when he objected to Pat Brady taking this pro-gay marriage approach publicly and saying that was a problem, but then, he did come around to saying it really has nothing. It's because the party is so, not raising enough money and not successful in elections. But he did say gay marriage was part of it because it's in the platform that marriage is a man and a woman, and to publicly go against a platform like that is kind of like saying I'm for Obamacare and I'm a Republican chairman and we can't have that. But they ended up canceling the meeting that they were going to have because of the lack of votes.
They thought they had the votes, and then one person peeled off because Mark Kirk and Tom Cross called and said, let's not do this right now.
But a regular meeting is coming up in mid-April, so we'll see if he finishes his term.
And the Republicans in Illinois have the same problems Republicans nationally do in terms of demographics. The biggest fast-growing populations in Illinois are Hispanics and Asians. We have a significant African American population. Women are the majority of the vote. Those are all of the demographics that the National Republican Party has trouble with, and part of the Illinois Republican Party has trouble with. And so when you're saying on one hand we need a bigger tent, but let's throw the chairman out because he's in favor of gay marriage, that's kind of
if that's really what it is.
It's mixed signals at best, and so it's a real problem for them, the Republicans, putting their best face forward in terms of 2014.
Now let's look just at the Democratic side a bit. Politically speaking, there were more than 50 Democratic county chairs. Doris Turner was on this, but she is among, I think there's more than 20 of those 50-some who actually work for the state, for the Quinn administration, came out with a letter that kind of mysteriously appeared on Capitol Facts one day, Rich Miller's blog. I mean, whatever, he got a hold of the letter, and it basically said, we Democratic county chairs, we think we should not have a primary in 2014 because it'll hurt the party, and Pat Quinn is doing a good job. It's funny because, of course, this comes as there's lots of speculation that Lisa Madigan, the Attorney General, popular in her Attorney General role, despite some people's reservations because her father is Speaker of the House, Michael Madigan. But Michael Madigan was also the target of Republican angst in the last election, and the House, and he's also Democratic state chairman, and Democrats ended up with supermajorities in both the House and Senate. Anyway, this letter says we shouldn't have a primary. Quinn's doing fine. As we tape this, we haven't heard Lisa Madigan's decision, but we think she's at least seriously. She said she's considering running for governor. What do we think is going to happen?
I don't know that I want to put money down on it, but she has to be looking at it seriously because she has to see that Governor Quinn, I think you'd have to say he's vulnerable. A lot depends on, can the GOP iron out their internal differences? Can they settle on a candidate that can win statewide? But you have to figure if they can, Pat Quinn is going to be in some trouble, and this would seem like a golden opportunity for her to take advantage of his the concerns that he raises among the populace in general and among his own party, even in the General Assembly. Obviously, there's not a lot of respect for or love lost on the governor. She does have a good track record of the sorts of feel-good things that attorneys general can do, and it seems like it's an opportunity. And she seems to have some big names in her camp, too. Dick Durbin has been talking this week and talked to Politico, the website, and certainly made it sound like, even though he didn't come out and endorse her, certainly made it sound like he was favorable to the prospect of her running and had a few critical things to say about the governor. You get somebody like Dick Durbin in your camp, you're a long way toward where you want to be, I think.
Yeah, but I think didn't he also say he doesn't endorse in primaries generally? He tries not. He did endorse Glenn Pritchard some years back, and Pritchard ended up being the nominee against George Ryan in '98. But
yeah, and those 50 county chairmen represent a lot of territory. They don't
but not so many people.
Not so many Democratic voters. There are a couple of big counties in there,
yeah.
But most of the Democratic vote comes out of Chicago and suburban Cook, and then another chunk out of the collar counties. And so, the governor obviously, I think, unless I can't imagine the circumstances when he's not going to run just because of kind of the way he's put together. And so he's trying to do something to kind of push back against all of this, the bad polls, the people kind of gathering around Lisa Madigan, and so he has to do something to push back to kind of show that he's alive and viable and all of those things.
Well, on the Republican side, I don't know if Adam Andrzejewski deserves to be mentioned here, but he had a press conference last week in Chicago at a club where you had to wear a jacket if you were a man, which made an important announcement for Illinois. He ran for governor last time. I think he took 5th out of 7. Maybe it was 4th.
He might have been 4th, I think.
And on the Republican side, and he's been running this organization called For the Good of Illinois, which tries to get financial data from all governments online, every check online, et cetera. And he talked in this press conference that was also live streamed on the internet. For about 8 minutes he talked and then said, "I'm not running for anything." Were you watching that, James? And did you have any reaction?
I didn't see it live, but I did see the announcement that said an important announcement for the future of Illinois, and his important announcement was he's not running for anything. we're saved, I guess. So.
I did notice that on Capitol Facts there were about 80 comments, and they were pretty funny. But it's like, who announces in a press conference that I'm not running for anything?
In a state that has a lot of politicians and would-be politicians with inflated egos, this individial probly stands out.
There you go.
So.
We don't have a lot of time left, but back to an issue in the legislature. Smart grid, they are talking, we think the House passed a bill that will allow major electric companies to charge some more to get kind of better service. Smart grid means your meter will know when to, will alert the company who has an outage and things like that.
Yeah, it's an attempt. There's a need to upgrade the infrastructure in terms of our energy grids, electricity being one of the, probably the primary one there. And there was a bill that was passed that was allowing rate increases to go towards with an understanding that certain things would happen, and then ComEd is behind in their schedule. This is who it benefits. The Commerce Commission, the Illinois Commerce Commission, turned down some of their rate requests, and there's a dispute about whether who should be paying and taking some of the risks, whether it should be the customers or the shareholders of the company. And this was a bill that was sponsored by the Senate President, that has veto-proof majorities. The governor is opposed to it. Some consumer advocates and like Citizens Utility Board are opposed to it. But it's pretty clear that they're going to get the money that they say they need to continue the upgrade, and that's really what the fight was about.
So the legislature is
overriding
not
the
what
Commerce
the governor wants.
and overriding
the
Commerce Commission.
Also, I'll just mention briefly that there was more discussion of how to handle concealed carry in Illinois. We don't have it yet, but they did turn down in the House. I saw one thing to make everybody with a gun get a concealed carry permit. You have to get $1 million of insurance. They didn't do that. We're going to have to end it there. Kent, Redfield, Jim Leach, thanks for sharing this time with us. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and thank you for sharing. We'll see you next time on Capitol View.